Welcome back to another episode of Guided by Faith. And today we're going to talk about a heavy topic. It's a topic that you have experienced, you might be walking through right now. It is one of the most common things that people can identify with in the world, and it's something that the Bible speaks very definitively into. And that's the topic of suffering. This week we are in Romans chapter 8. And in Romans chapter 8, let me remember exactly where it is. Romans chapter 8, verse 18, the Apostle Paul says, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing to the glory that's going to be revealed in us." And I just want to talk for a little bit today about suffering. You might be suffering right now, or you might be in a season of suffering, or somebody that you love and care about might be going through suffering right now. Suffering is something that really is a theme through the whole Bible. Why do people suffer? Why does God stay back? Why does it seem like God doesn't intervene sometimes when people suffer? Also the comfort and deliverance that God brings while people suffer. Suffering is really a major theme, and something that I love is one of the titles of Jesus that we get is the suffering servant. I think it's actually the book of Mark, maybe that's kind of one of the thematic titles of it, is that Jesus, our Savior, our King, our Redeemer, is also the suffering servant. He took on the sufferings of humanity. Today, I want to talk about two different types of suffering, because you may be one of these that ask, like, well, why is suffering even a thing? If God really loved everybody, if God really loved me, he wouldn't let me suffer. And I understand that, and there's degrees of that question that I've asked. And as a matter of fact, that's kind of the founding of the entire religion of Buddhism. There was the guy who ended up becoming the Buddha, looked around and he saw suffering, and he went back and pondered it. And the core tenet of Buddhism is life is suffering. And the reason that you suffer is because you have desires, and the way that you escape suffering is to cease to desire anything. Well, I guess that sounds great, but what that means is you cease to desire good things. You cease to desire bad things. You basically become numb to everything when it's all said and done. And that's not the message of the Bible. That's not the message of the gospel. But the Bible does say that suffering is very real, and suffering serves a point. And I want to say, just first off, the way that I would say that suffering ultimately works is that suffering is like God's megaphone into a broken world, a world that is morally broken, that all is not right. I want you to think about it. I want you to think about how if our hearts were really dark and corrupt, but there weren't the natural consequences of cause and effect of sickness, of sin, and these things. If like death wasn't in the picture, but our hearts were super corrupt, death might not ever come, but evil would increase more and more and more and more. Now, evil is pretty horrible in the world already, but I believe that suffering is one of those megaphones that God uses to show us that all is not right, that God does not think everything is good in the world and the way humanity works. So let's talk really quickly about two different types of suffering. The first type of suffering is what I would just call suffering because of sin. Suffering because of sin. And this really encompasses most suffering. So natural disasters, famines, the effects of war, violence on people, really even starvation, and a lot of these things, cancers, sickness, these betrayal, these are all suffering because of sin. Some of it is because God put a curse on the earth because of sin, and much of it is because of the way that humans treat one another. And a lot of the suffering that you have experienced in life, or you will experience in life, is because of sin. It may not be your sin. It just might be because of the community that you live in, or the community of all humanity. Because we have all sinned, we all suffer for it. And this is a common human experience. And I want to remind you that God is not blind to it. God cares about you. Jesus, the suffering servant, entered into our suffering. And so whatever horrific degree that you see of suffering, because of sin, I don't want you to think that God doesn't care about it. Jesus has said that he's going to make all things new. He's going to redeem the suffering of the world. He's going to wipe away every tear. These are things that he has promised and we can count on. So that's one, is suffering because of sin. And if you're suffering right now, it's a good question to ask. Is there a particular sin that I might be committing that has caused my suffering? Am I suffering the consequences of sin? It may not be the case, but it's a good one to ask. Secondly, is what I would, sometimes it is a suffering because of sin, but I think more particularly one that the Bible speaks to for Christians is suffering for Christ. Suffering for Christ. And in suffering for Christ, you have a wide spectrum of things, including people who are persecuted, beaten, even killed for their faith. I just recently got videos from India of pastors being horrifically beaten by these long, thick poles, breaking the bones of pastors simply for sharing the gospel. That is absolutely suffering for Christ. When people lose jobs, when people have their homes burned down, when people are kicked out of their families because of their faith, that is suffering for Christ. But suffering for Christ also includes when you resist sin, when you have a terrible temptation and you say, because I belong to Jesus, I'm not going to give in to that sin. That is suffering for Christ. When you deny your flesh, when you are willing to do the hard thing in order to follow Jesus, that is also suffering for Christ. And I can promise you that God will not be a debtor to anyone who suffers for him. So to whatever degree that you face persecution, or whatever degree you face the really difficult level of resisting temptation to not give in, whatever sacrifices that you make for Christ, he will not be a debtor to you. He will reward it. And if you don't have the reward on this earth, you ought to be even more thrilled, because that means it will be exponentially multiplied forever in a new heavens and new earth. So you're going to suffer. It's going to be a part of the reality of life. But Jesus has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, you are with me. So I just want to encourage you today, when you see suffering, when you experience suffering, remember, it's God's megaphone that the world is broken, but he hasn't left us. He is with us. He is for us. He will walk with you through suffering, and he will reward you for every ounce of suffering that you might ever do for the sake of Jesus and the sake of the gospel. And I hope that is encouraging hope for whatever you're walking through today.